Hi everyone, my name is Daniil Gataulin. I'm one of senior research analysts here at Chardon covering biotech, where our vision is to help identify companies with high potential for investment returns based on creating real value for society through disruptive innovation. It is my pleasure to introduce Russ Trenary, the CEO, and Larry Kenyon, the CFO from Outlook Therapeutics, to our virtual ophthalmology summit, where the initial focus is on wet AMD and diabetes-related ocular diseases. Russ, Larry, welcome.
Thanks, Daniil.
Daniil, thanks.
Yeah, so to start things off, could you give a few minutes overview of Outlook Therapeutics, as well as highlighting some recent milestones?
Yeah, thank you again for having us, Daniil. So what we're doing at Outlook Therapeutics is our big idea is to achieve the first ever FDA approval in ophthalmology for bevacizumab to treat retinal disorders. Our first trial was in wet macular degeneration. And then ultimately, we've also got SPAs that are approved to treat diabetic macular edema as well as branch retinal vein occlusion. So that'll kind of cover the retina landscape for us. The neat thing about this particular opportunity for us and for our investors is that bevacizumab is a molecule that's been around for a long time. It's a well-known, well-trusted molecule, but it has never been presented in the ideal format for ophthalmology. It's been used off-label. Off-label, despite the fact that there have been no approvals in ophthalmology for bevacizumab of any way, shape, or kind. So this is really exciting for us to take something that doctors are familiar with, they've trusted. I think they've all known in the back of their minds that it could be better if it was presented in a format that has been approved by FDA in ophthalmology, and if it could be presented to them in a manner in which it doesn't have to be subjected to the vagaries of the compounding repackaging process. So this is super exciting for us to be able to feel like we can do something that will actually enhance the standard of care in treating retina disorders.
Got it. Thank you, Russ. So as you mentioned, bevacizumab has been used for years without the formal approval for ophthalmologic indications. So can you go maybe into a little bit more detail how exactly it is positioned in current treatment landscape for wet AMD?
Yeah, so back around 20 years ago, I think there was a curiosity in ophthalmology around, there were a couple of molecules that were sort of leading the way. Ranibizumab was one of them. And bevacizumab was an anti-VEGF. These are all the same class of compound. They're anti-VEGF drugs that are biologics that are meant to treat the VEGF processes that are the things that are messing things up in the retina. Anti-VEGFs were in use in oncology, and bevacizumab was known to be able to treat this kind of a disease entity. But the company that happened to own both molecules at the time, both bevacizumab as well as ranibizumab, decided to take ranibizumab to the clinic and get an FDA approval for that and price it in a fashion that was, within shouting distance of $2,000 per injection. I think that surprised some ophthalmologists. And so they actually worked with the National Eye Institute to conduct a study that would compare off-label bevacizumab to ranibizumab. And they did in that large study show non-inferiority of bevacizumab to the FDA-approved version of ranibizumab. So that kind of began the process of compounders procuring in some way, shape, or form bevacizumab, taking the approved containers that were designed to be used in oncology, drawing the material out, repackaging them, aliquoting them into small volume syringes and vials, and then selling them at a much lower price point. So it kind of created a kind of a bifurcated marketplace where you had, FDA approved versions of anti-VEGF that were priced, close to $2,000 per injection, being mindful that in today's world, about 5 to 7 injections per year per patient are utilized, at least in year one of therapy. That almost $2,000 price point was relative to something that was far, far lower than that in the repackaged version. And so the marketplace developed where about half of the injections are off-label today. The other half are on-label FDA-approved versions. And we believe we've got an opportunity to establish, to establish bevacizumab as an actual FDA-approved molecule in ophthalmology at a price point that's approachable for payers and for doctors.
Got it, understand. So the molecule that you're talking about at Outlook, the ophthalmic indication molecule is Letenova. Can you explain exactly how different it is from repackaged bevacizumab?
Yeah, happy to. So there are a couple of things. First, I think it's important to understand that the bevacizumab that was designed to treat oncology was also designed to go into a drip IV. It was not designed to be injected in a patient's eyes. And FDA has spent a lot of time and study trying to determine what should the requirements be to earn the right to inject a biologic into a patient's eyes. And so they came up with a lot of standards associated with that. One of those was you're only allowed to have X number of particulates in your solution to earn an FDA approval to be injected in somebody's eyes. That number is a fraction of the number of particulates that they allow per their standards to go into a molecule that goes into a drip IV. So if you look at particulate count, if you look at pH levels, FDA wants a certain pH level for use in eye care. If you look at osmolarity specifications, FDA approved packaging in ophthalmology, endotox levels, shelf life and stability data, all of these are things that we must prove in order to get our biologic into the clinic for a clinical trial and then to earn the approval. All of that stuff I just mentioned, the standards are different for oncology for something that's going to go into a drip IV than for something that gets injected in somebody's eyes. Then on top of all of that, then you get subjected to the things that happen during the repackaging process. So you start with a molecule that doesn't meet ophthalmic standards, then you repackage it. And what happens during that process? Well, one study showed there was a group called Dr. Yanutzi et al. And Szilard Kish was one of the authors, who's an advisor of ours. He's out of Cornell. They did a random sampling of product of off-label bevacizumab that was going to be used in ophthalmology. They took a random sample from 11 different compounding pharmacies, and they ran a series of tests on them, and they compared the results of those tests to the solution that's used in oncology. And what they found was in 81% of the samples, the drug protein concentration level was less in the off-label bevacizumab that was about to be injected into a patient's eyes compared to the oncology version of bevacizumab. So what that meant was you started with a product that doesn't meet ophthalmic standards, then you subject it to the vagaries of the repackaging process. And on the other side of that, in this study, 81% of the samples had insufficient drug protein concentration compared to the control, which was bevacizumab for oncology. So what was happening there? Well, we've hired a gentleman who spent a good portion, the last 15 years of his professional life, building one of the leading market share positions of off-label bevacizumab for ophthalmology. And we hired him. In fact, he called me, several quarters ago and said, look, I've built this great business I see what you guys are doing. You're going to provide a pristine level of safety and efficacy potentially that I can't deliver in my compounding pharmacy, but I still want to be part of the bevacizumab story. I still want to take this great molecule and get it and help get it to the next level. So we hired him away from that compounding pharmacy. And what he taught us is that when you're drawing the biologic out of the container that was meant for oncology and putting it through a filtering process and back into a small volume syringe or vial that's appropriate for use in retina, there's a shearing of the molecule that occurs and a reaggregation of that on the other side. And he said, this is one of the things, aside from lack of temperature control and things like that, this is one of the things that happens during the repackaging process. And it's why that study, lack of temperature control and the shearing of this molecule, are the probable causes of why there was 81% of the samples with less drug in it than in the original bevacizumab container for oncology. So I think it's really exciting for us to be able to peer into a marketplace where 50% of the injections are being served by a great molecule that's just never been in its ideal format. And so we're looking forward to earning an FDA approval and earning other regulatory approvals around the world so that we can get this product into patients' eyes as soon as possible.
Yeah, got it. Thank you very much for that thorough answer. If as a follow-up to this, so despite all the issues that you described with the repackaged product, are you at all surprised by how many doctors and patients continue to use bevacizumab?
So I think it's the strength of the molecule and the relative safety and efficacy of that product through time, and its price point. So, if there's a like a $1,500 to $2,000 difference per injection between FDA approved versions and off-label bevacizumab, which has been the case, I think that is rationale for use. Having said that, one of the other things that we found in our examination of this whole area is, although doctors will start their patients on off-label Avastin, a preponderance of the time they will switch them to another molecule. And why are they switching them? Well, I think we just explained part of it. If you do have a lot of your product coming in with not enough drug protein concentration, what the doctor could be seeing is, after doing 1 or 2 or 3 loading doses of off-label bevacizumab, if the patient's coming in month 3 or month 4 or month 5 and they're still not dry, that could motivate the doctor to switch them to something that's FDA approved. So I think pricing is part of it, is probably the largest part of it, and just kind of the convenience of being able to have some of this low-cost bevacizumab in your refrigerator, so that when a patient presents, they're able to be treated. So we knew, Daniil, that one of the important aspects of this whole thing was going to be, what kind of price point should we be providing? And so we did several years of pricing research with both payers as well as with retina specialists. And we basically asked them, what is it you're looking for? So y'all know we can't come in at a price that is where the compounders are. We have to earn an FDA approval. It's not free. But we are going to be delivering potentially a pristine level of safety and efficacy that you've not seen. So what are your expectations? And basically, they gave us a swim lane. They, knowing that since the beginning of time, since the beginning of ranibizumab and aflibercept being approved, now a couple of biosimilars have come in to ranibizumab. Those are all priced well over $1,000. So the payers and the doctors looked at this area and said, look, if you're in the low to mid hundreds to the high hundreds per injection, that's less than we're paying now. for just about everything else. So I think they looked at that as that swim lane as a price point that could be appropriate. And so I think the opportunity we have, Daniil, is that we can be the first company to be able to hopefully achieve an approval in the anti-VEGF space for retina and launch a product that's priced according to what our customers have indicated as what they would like to see. And the key customers here, of course, are the payers, the doctors, and of course, the patients who have a copay. All of those are key customers for us. And we think we've done enough research to determine what they want. And so we plan to price it according to what our customers have indicated would be most appropriate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And with respect to compounding pharmacies, what does that market look like? And what, if anything, can they do to keep repackaging bevacizumab once Trenary is approved?
Yeah, so the repackaged bevacizumab marketplace is a loose cabal of unaffiliated compounders. So I think the one thing that we've noted is there is law that has been passed in 2013 and then reiterated in 2020 that indicates that when FDA has gone through the trouble of approving a drug or biologic, then compounding of essentially the exact same thing is no longer authorized. So I think it puts compounders in a world of concern because they've got, if they're on the wrong side of what's in the law, they have to be concerned probably about FDA inspections when FDA comes in to examine what it is they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. State pharmacy boards have responsibility for oversight of the pharmacy operations within their states. Some of this compounding and repackaging happens in university systems who all have ethics committees. So we think they might look askance at being on the wrong side of the law. OMIC, the largest medical malpractice insurer in ophthalmology, even today, we've been told by doctors that if they have a patient on therapy with off-label bevacizumab in one eye and they're about to start therapy in the second eye of off-label bevacizumab, OMIC is like, we don't want to provide malpractice insurance for that second eye. So they're an insurance company. They probably see more data than anybody on safety and efficacy and things like that. So we wonder what their stance might be associated with that. So I think and then of course, just if one or two or three compounders, suddenly decide, you know what, I don't want to put my entire franchise at risk here. This is not my entire business. I'm making a lot of other products. No use getting everybody all irritated with me. Maybe some of them will self-select. And as they do, one of the things our former executive from the compounding industry has taught us is that changes in required volume for compounders are a heavy lift. They can't inventory this stuff very easily. And shelf life is kind of a jump ball coming out of a compounding pharmacy, right? I mean, we're going to launch with 2 or 3 years of shelf life. I mean, that's kind of a norm in the anti-VEGF space is to have multiple years on your labeling for shelf life. You can't get that out of a compounding pharmacy. So their ability to react to either needing to provide less or more over a short period of time, could be challenging for some of them. So we think that what we'd like to do is to provide to the payer community, to the doctor community, something that they're delighted to take on as an addition to their armamentarium, rather than just be compelled to use it. We'd like them to be voting for us, rather than somebody telling them they have to use this. So that's the approach that we're taking. And I think, given the data that came out of our clinical trial and all the requirements we've got to meet from FDA, we think we're well positioned.
Okay, got it. And so bevacizumab is also used off-label for other indications like DME and RVL. And if lecanemab is approved for wet AMD, will DME and RVL patients be able to continue to use repackaged bevacizumab, or do they have to switch to lecanemab, or is that going to be up to their treating physicians?
Yeah, we're assuming that the doctors are the ones that cast the primary vote here. We would note it would be strange to, if we've got an approval for wet AMD, it is at least an ophthalmic indication. So what you decide to use it for as a doctor, at least we'll have labeling associated with that. There is no labeling for off-label bevacizumab for any of those requirements. So we're looking forward to the doctors being able to make an informed choice on what to do. We can't promote it for anything besides wet AMD, and that's
Sure.
That's what our team will be doing.
Got it. Okay, and so you mentioned or you alluded to the clinical trial that you had to run. Can you maybe highlight, at least at high level, what you had to show in terms of safety and efficacy for lecanemab for the BLA submission and MAA submission for that matter?
Yeah, so we were so excited to unmask these results and see what had happened, because they really exceeded our expectations. Our primary endpoint, Daniil, was what was the number of 3-line gainers. And we had almost 42% of our patients gained 3 lines or 15 letters on the eye chart. We had over 56% of our patients gained 2 lines of vision, which was one of our secondary endpoints. And we had almost 70% of our patients gain 5 letters or a line or more. Another key secondary endpoint for us was the average best corrected visual acuity number of letters gained, and we had 11.2 letters gained averaging all of our patients. And on top of that, there were 12 post-op checkups for the patients during our clinical trial. There was one each month. And what we found during that period of time is that over 80% of the patients gained or maintained vision. And during most of those time points, over 85%, up to 89% of the patients gained or maintained vision at every single time point along during the clinical trial. On top of that, doctors have seen a lot of news recently about safety concerns for certain efforts, both in clinical trials as well as in the marketplace itself. And intraocular inflammation that results in permanent vision loss has been a particular concern of doctors over the last couple of years. There have been products both in the market as well as in the clinic for trial that have shown results that have been a concern for the doctors, and been a lot of press releases put out just in the last couple of weeks on this subject. We had one case of intraocular inflammation across all of our clinical trials, and that one case was an iritis that was treated and resolved. Did not result in vision loss. So that safety record, on top of the great response rate that we were getting with bevacizumab, just made our clinical trial results something that really exceeded our expectations.
Got it. And for the pivotal trial, how did you decide on the dosing regimen for the comparator arm, which I believe was Lucentis? Because I understand per label, there are basically 3 dosing regimens approved for Lucentis, ranging from once every month to once every 3 months with different number of loading doses.
Yeah, great question. So the way that we looked at it was the non-inferiority trial between bevacizumab and ranibizumab had already been run by the federal government. The National Eye Institute had conducted the trial, as I mentioned to you long ago, and those results were published in 2012, and it showed that even off-label bevacizumab, although it was in a format you can't get today, it came out of a single compounding pharmacy, produced almost under GMP conditions, unlike what happens today. But that product showed non-inferiority to ranibizumab in a monthly dosing regimen during that clinical trial. Since that trial had already been run, we saw an opportunity to do something that would take fewer number of patients and get to the finish line quicker. And so we ran a superiority trial. And there were a number of things we could have chosen, placebo or a sham injection being one of them. But instead, what we decided to do is to try to demonstrate superiority against the peer regimen that is in the FDA-approved labeling for ranibizumab, for Lucentis. And what that regimen looks like is it starts with 3 loading doses, and there are quarterly doses thereafter. So we compared monthly dosing of bevacizumab so that we could show FDA what our response rate is, like everyone has shown at some point in time during their clinical trial experience. And even the CAT trial, which was the study that was run by the NEI, and published back in 2012, included monthly dosing. So there would even be a comparison to that, even though it's really difficult to do cross-trial comparisons. It's at least information that was out there. So we ran a superiority trial against the peer regimen, and what we found was a monthly dosing of bevacizumab was in fact, of our ONS 5010, was in fact superior to Lucentis's peer regimen, which I think every doctor, anybody who's schooled in the space would have expected. It's a superiority dosing regime compared to the peer regimen. But it did give the doctors something interesting to look at. I think never before had they seen what would the results of peer look like compared to a monthly dosing of bevacizumab. So I think it was, a neat thing that we've added to the science, to the field, data in a registration trial that nobody had ever seen before. But really, it was meant to get us to the finish line as quickly as possible with as few a number of patients as possible, and be able to show excellent statistical significance in that superiority arm compared to the control arm. And boy, did we show it. I mean, in our primary and most of our secondary endpoints, your goal is to show a p-value of 0.05. Our p-value on our primary endpoint was 0.005. Hard to say that's a chance event. And we had extra digits like that in a lot of our secondary endpoints as well. So, I think it will not result in a superiority marketing claim because we were using a superior dosing regimen, but it did show a good response rate. And I think it gave FDA some really good information about what our ONS 5010, that if approved will be marketed under the brand name Lytenava, did show what the art of the possible was for that monthly dosing regimen.
Got it. That makes sense, Russ. And given that bevacizumab is off patent, how do you see the competitive landscape developing?
So I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understood where you're going with that one.
Yeah. So how will you be protecting the sales of Lytenava once approved? How do you get market exclusivity?
Yeah. So great question. So if we're successful getting this molecule approved for this condition, we're getting a 351A. Our regulatory pathway is a normal 351A pathway, like the one that was engaged by the other brands that have been investigated and approved. That comes with 12 years of regulatory exclusivity in the United States. And similarly, a similar pathway, if we have successful conclusion with the CHMP in Europe, will grant us up to 10 years of regulatory exclusivity there as well. So obviously for us to be able to engage in this pathway, the patents on bevacizumab had to have expired, which they have, the relevant patents, but we do have some protection with the 12 years of regulatory exclusivity in the United States. What that means is if somebody wants to come in and be a biosimilar, bevacizumab biosimilar to us, they won't have access to the marketplace until 12 years have gone by.
Got it. Makes sense. Got it. In terms of potential economic opportunity or market opportunity, can you comment on under ideal case scenario what you envision it to be for Letenova, and how do you particularly see early adoption?
Well, we see our opportunity is if 3.5 million injections, if 50% of the injections in the United States are occupied by off-label bevacizumab, that's what we see as our opportunity. One of the things that Larry, our CFO, has always well described is the fact that all of the biosimilars and brands that have come into the marketplace at those higher price points have always been competing for 50% of the market. Nobody's ever felt like they could go down and compete with off-label bevacizumab. Well, we think we can. And so that's really our main target. I think that doctors who are happy doing what they're doing with the other brands can probably continue to do that. I think we can go in and build a very nice business based upon bringing that potential pristine level of safety and efficacy to the off-label marketplace.
I understand. And with respect to potential commercialization, you announced a partnership with AmerisourceBergen a while ago. Can you talk about that partnership and what made AmerisourceBergen an attractive partner for you?
Yeah, what a fantastic partnership it is that we have with them. People, I think of AmerisourceBergen as a great Fortune 9 company with, immense 3PL capabilities. And yes, they do have all of that. They are the kings of cold chain distribution. We do have a temperature controlled requirement for storage and shipping. So very happy to partner with them. But what not everybody realizes, they also have capabilities in medical literature distribution, in pharmacovigilance, in GPO contracting, and just a lot of analytical capabilities that, a lot of the big companies probably, obviously have these same capabilities. Things like pharmacovigilance are regulatory requirements. But we didn't see a reason to build our own capability in that at Outlook when it already existed at AmerisourceBergen. So they can bring expertise and experience to these areas and really save our balance sheet and cash flow and payroll and not having to duplicate those same resources. So we're super excited to be hooked up to them. And I think obviously their distribution reach is all across the United States, which is our first target, but they also have capabilities outside of the United States. So I think to be associated with them, I think gives us a lot of strength in being able to reach into all four corners of the United States and then look elsewhere outside of the United States as well.
Got it. Okay. And so the PDUFA date for Letenova is coming up at the end of next month. And with that in mind, what do you see currently as the biggest risk to the approval?
Yeah, so our PDUFA day, thank you, Daniil, is August 29th. So we're anxiously awaiting that date. You know, as far as we know, we've provided all of the necessary information in both clinical as well as CMC in order to earn the approval. I think that had our safety data not been as pristine as it was, given all of the concerns that have come up recently on intraocular inflammation and other safety risks and adverse events that are causing permanent vision loss in some cases. If we had not had that, I'd be worried about a late inning look at that. But our safety record in this study were excellent, as was our efficacy. So aside from just the concerns of what could they think of next from FDA, I mean, they have the power to make the decision here. So you just have to lay awake at night until you get across that finish line from a regulatory standpoint. But at that point, you're at the starting line in being able to make this product available to the marketplace.
Got it. Understand. And in terms of manufacturing, so you're utilizing manufacturing partners to make Lugtenova. Can you comment on whether all the necessary FDA inspections have been completed? Any other outstanding CMC issues?
Yeah, so we have not given the marketplace a blow-by-blow on when FDA's gone in for factory inspections or clinical site inspections or things like that. But I will say that we think we've got two great factory partners in Fujifilm Diosynth in their location in College Station, Texas, and in Ajinomoto Biopharma with their location in San Diego. Both are experienced companies in this whole area. We have found their CMC capabilities to be outstanding. We did a lot of work with them on mock inspections. We went through both of their factories several times with our mock inspection teams that we hired, and just felt all along like both of those companies had great capability to not only run a clean shop, but be in a position to do what needs to be done to get through FDA inspections in really good shape. So we're confident in those folks and believe that they've got all the capabilities required to get us to the finish line.
Got it. I see. I see we are running a little bit short on time, but wanted to ask a couple more questions. One, you mentioned that you have SPA in place for a couple other indications, DME and RVO. Wanted to ask what your plans are for those.
Yeah, we want to make sure that our sales organization is in good shape and ultimately allowed to promote for those two disease entities, even though the vast majority of the anti-VEGF is targeted at wet AMD. There's still a noticeable enough, large enough market segments for DME and BRVO that we do plan to do those studies once we've got an FDA approval in our pocket. And in addition to that, we'll be following on we're running an additional study for the prefilled syringe. That'll be a post-approval supplement as well. So all of those three things are on our list for once we've already achieved the FDA approval. And again, we'll be targeting those BRVO and DME as well as the prefilled syringe for our European approval processes as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. And in terms of finances, what is the current cash balance and projected runway? And maybe to take it one step further, when do you expect to become cash positive if Lugtenova is approved as expected?
Yeah, thanks, Daniil. So the last reported cash on hand we had was at the end of March, our second fiscal quarter for 2023. We had $43 million. We expect that cash to get us through the end of calendar 2023. If all goes as planned with the approval at the end of August, we expect to be able to begin selling product in calendar Q4 of 2023, and we fully expect to be cash flow positive within 4 quarters of that launch. So we're targeting calendar Q4 of 2024 to be cash flow positive.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you, Larry. And to conclude with one last big picture question, what do you believe investors are missing about Outlook story?
I think the company was in stealth mode for a really long time, Daniil, and the company had come up with a very clever regulatory strategy that folks had not seen before. So I think there was some question around, can you get approval doing it that way? I thought you had to do back-to-back non-inferiority trials. So we hope to prove them wrong on August 29, but I think that's been a little bit of a concern. And I think the lack of understanding around what is the type of product that's coming out in the form of repackaged bevacizumab. I think there was some temptation to think it's just repackaged bevacizumab that's being used in oncology, and it should be just as good as the stuff that's out there that's selling for almost $2,000 per injection. But I think we've been able to, and we're still going through the process of educating investors as well as doctors. What does FDA require for an ophthalmic approval? And what are the things that happens during the repackaging process? It was interesting. We had a group of dozens of the leading retina specialists in the country, and we asked them how many people know about this study that Szilard Kish and Januzzi et al. Performed, where they showed that 81% of the samples had less drug in it than the bevacizumab that's delivered to oncology patients. There were only 3 doctors in the whole room that knew about it, and one of them was one of the authors. So I think there's a lot of education still to be done. And then, of course, Daniil, I think the other thing that you can't blame investors or doctors for this. Nobody knew how we were going to price this. I think a lot of people thought we were going to take something that had been very cheap and charge $1,500 to $2,000 for it. They won't know what that number is until we get our FDA approval and then announce price shortly thereafter. But I think there's been kind of a combination of things that have caused not everybody to get it. But you
got it. Thank you. Got it. Well, thank you very much, Russ. Thank you very much, Larry. Really appreciate you joining our summit. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Really appreciate your time, Daniil.